the statement of a woman is basically treated as an evidence in itself.
Oh, wow.
Yes. My name is Deepika Narayan Bhardwaj. I'm from India and I'm a documentary filmmaker.
I understand that you recently made a film that you are currently coming close to releasing. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, my documentary is called Martyrs of Marriage. It's on misuse of IPC 498A, which is also known as the anti-dowry law. People know that law usually as the dowry law in India. It's about the abuse of this provision, how this law is abused, why this law is abused, how men and their families have been destroyed by false accusations under this law, the journey of this law as in why it was brought in the first place and what is now happening, and eventually cases where people committed suicide because of abuse of this provision. So this issue has been going on for a long time in India without being addressed by our lawmakers. So I wanted to actually tell the story of these men who have suffered the abuse of this provision to the world.
Can we go into 498A a little bit more and explain for people who are not familiar perhaps with Indian culture and your government and all of that?
All right. So 498A is a law that criminalizes cruelty on a married woman. And this cruelty can be physical harassment or mental harassment from the perspective of dowry demand. So it is a law that essentially criminalizes any demand of dowry. Now, dowry is any valuable security, money, or anything that the wife side basically gives to the groom side. So the issue of dowry has been there for very long in India. Abroad, a lot of people know that, they know India, that there is a crime of dowry or dowry is demanded. So earlier, in earlier days, dowry started as gifts that were given by the wife's side, the bride's side to the groom's side, because she was supposed to go to a new home. She would need her own stuff to start a new life. So it used to be given like that, but slowly and steadily it took a different shape wherein people started demanding what they wanted, and it was cited as one of the major reasons for domestic violence on a married woman. So in 1983, the law was brought in picture after a very strong protest by the women's rights activists in the light of deaths or murders of married women, and there was a very strong pitch for bringing or criminalizing domestic violence. Until then, we did not have a domestic violence law. We had a law that prohibited dowry demand, but we did not have a domestic violence act per se. It was in the normal penal code as any other law, which is there for everybody, which is for hurt or grievous hurt or anything like that. But this was a special provision which was then brought in 1983 to criminalize dowry, domestic violence, physical harassment, mental harassment, only on a married woman by her husband or his relatives. So anybody basically could be named under the section: husband, his parents, sisters, brothers, anybody.
Right.
So it basically criminalized dowry demand and cruelty.
But to be clear, before this existed, it doesn't mean that domestic violence was something that was accepted, right?
Absolutely
it was still
not.
a law.
No, absolutely. Like I said, there were provisions in the Indian Penal Code that basically criminalized any sort of hurt or any violence, which is generic, right?
Right.
So anybody could take recourse under that provision. But the special provision for married women only was brought in 1983.
And what about married men who are the victims of domestic violence? Does this law protect them at all?
No.
All right. These accusations don't have to involve physical violence. They could simply be hurtful words, and they treat them the same. Is that correct?
Yes.
So the severity, it doesn't differ between something that someone has said or implied and then something that people have actually done.
No, actually, the biggest issue in terms of implementation of this law is that the police has stopped asking for any kind of evidence, and So that helps people cook up various kind of stories. And yes, the law doesn't require a woman. Like I said, it's a continuous cruelty that it criminalizes. There's no need for just immediate reporting of it. And the perception usually is that the woman would be taking violence or cruelty for a long period of time, so she would not immediately report it. But just to answer that, yes, you don't need any evidence, a medical report. You don't need, even though the law says that cruelty to the extent that the woman commits suicide or a behavior that causes danger to her life, limb, or health, which is looks like quite a serious sort of violence or behavior. But yeah, frivolous things like he shouted at me, or he wouldn't allow me to use my mobile phone, or extremely bizarre things have been cited in complaints, and there are several cases that come to us. But more than that, there are several complaints while making the documentary that I saw, which had exactly the same language, exactly the same lines, to the extent that there were some complaints, and this is not 498 but the Domestic Violence Act, but all of them get filed on the husband together. A woman in the domestic violence case said that she wants maintenance for her child. The couple did not have any child. So it was a complaint which was copied from some other woman's complaint who might have had a child. But the lawyer just forgot to remove that line from it. So that's the extent to which these complaints are copied. And in some case, the husband or his family would have gone somewhere, and they would cite that as an example that some episode happened there. Now this happened in one case, it did not happen in the other case, but that instance would be included in this case as well, and the husband would be thinking, well, I never went there, I don't even know this place where it is. So that's the extent to which the complaints are copied, and yes, not really essential that you provide any kind of evidence. And also, to add to it, the statement of a woman is basically treated as an evidence in itself.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yes. When I say that it's a statement of the woman, that's also not just the point. There's one more thing which is absolutely bizarre, is that the witnesses of that case, in these cases usually, like this person sharing the documentary as well, the witnesses usually would be the wife's mother, the wife's father, the wife's brother, and they would testify on whatever she's saying. They are the witnesses. They would obviously say what she is saying, right? How can
Obviously.
why would they deny anything like that? Yes, you can cross-question them on that, but what about the witnesses what about the witnesses who are neighbors? What about the witnesses in his company or her company, or people around, or anybody who, or people who attended the wedding or something like that? So it's all just so one-sided. You file a complaint, your mother would say, yes, they used to harass her, your father would say, yes, they used to harass her, yes, they demanded dowry in front of me on that date, on this, and this was the amount, that's it. Yeah.
It's crazy.
And what really happens, it's very interesting to actually share. When the wedding is happening, people want the wedding to be like this, larger than life. I'm sure you would have heard about Indian weddings, right? They would want to spend money, they would want to do all kind of things. And when this case happens, all of that money becomes dowry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All of it.
Yes, all of it. Any gift that you gave to the husband, and you don't need to, ideally, supposedly you're supposed to provide a list of things of the exchanges, but very few people do, and even then you can actually file the complaint.
And what about feminist groups? Are they also talking about it at all? Or do you have that there?
Oh yes, there are feminists who are extremely concerned about the attention that Martyrs of Marriage is getting. They invited me to a conference, and they said they wanted to show the documentary in that feminist conference. And I would have, of course, gone and presented my film. I would have been happy to have a dialogue with them, or maybe tell them, show them a mirror, but I was screening somewhere else, so I couldn't go. But she later on, the lady who contacted me, I wrote to her, so how was the conference? So she said, oh well, we discussed why this narrative of misuse of 498 is being, projected in India, and sort of said, it's not a narrative, it's a reality. Oh well, you think it's a reality. I said, it is a reality. So anyways, there was no point talking to her because she has her own opinions. But yeah, there are very strong women's rights groups. They are very strong opponents to any changes in this law. They wield a lot of authority on our lawmakers. To the extent that recently our home minister, one of our member of parliament, who is also a minister, he spoke about, he just mentioned a little bit of data on false cases under the Domestic Violence Act, and we have 498 as a criminal provision, but there's a separate Domestic Violence Act as well. So we have got two domestic violence laws, in which one is just for money, and other is just to send the person to jail. So there are two different provisions. This minister in the parliament was talking about false cases that are filed under the Domestic Violence Act and the reported numbers. And the women parliamentarians got so agitated. How dare you talk about misuse? Do you know what happens to women? Blah, 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 blah. And you got to apologize. How can you say something? Do you even know what is happening? And they're citing one or two cases and whatever, which they get to know about. And this guy felt just so apologetic. He had to apologize, and this has happened so many times that, they just can't even utter it. But on this particular issue, there have been discussions in the parliament. There have been petitions submitted to the Rajya Sabha. There have been petitions in the highest courts in India. There was a question raised on the constitutionality of the law per se, because it violates rights. It's a human rights violation. The Constitution grants equality to all, but this law is absolutely unequal, and its implementation is even more gory and biased. So its constitutionality was challenged, and that's when the statement that I discussed in the documentary of the Supreme Court judge saying that the law is constitutional because there's an exception in our Constitution where special provisions for women can be made. So they said that it is constitutional, keeping in mind that particular specific provision. But having said that, we have observed, this is an extreme amount of abuse of this law, and if it is not checked, then it basically is like legal terrorism, and the law was made as a shield and not an assassin's weapon.
Right.
And it is being used as a weapon. So these were extremely strong words by the Supreme Court of India. But the situation remains the same.
If you can just tell us a bit about the personal story involving the person in your family that took advantage of 498A and tried to use it against, I guess, all of you.
So the case was never filed eventually, but there were threats and accusations that were hurled. And it was a case of an extramarital affair, and when that was exposed, there were discussions on what to do, and it was decided that, amicably part ways. But sometime after that decision was made and a petition of mutual consent divorce was filed, is when these, you get to see these summons where it is said that the entire family, including the husband, the sister, the father, the mother, used to harass her for dowry, beat her up. She was thrown out of the home in 3 pairs of clothes. And this is at that time, when I read it for the first time, it was extremely shocking because it was an absolute lie. There was anyways, it was not very long because it was cooked up. So, but those 6-7 lines that were written were absolutely false, and that came as a huge shock, as in something that has just not happened. How can it be written about? But then that's how complaints under 498A are made, which I got to know much later when I looked at these complaints that were made. And it's just very easy to accuse anybody. Now, of course, a lot of it lies on the sensibility of the police officer who's registering the complaint, but they don't really use too much of their brains, as in, for example, like I said, the law basically criminalizes physical or mental harassment. Now, mental harassment, she would say that during the wedding, my sister-in-law who was married and who was staying somewhere else came and then taunted me that this thing that you've given is not good. So that's charged under 498A, a law that cites violence of such a serious nature and then has conviction of 3 years of punishment. But here you are making such a frivolous statement again. And one of the cases that I discussed in the documentary, where the 89-year-old woman who was accused of demanding dowry and by her granddaughter-in-law, so there's this 89-year-old woman, she's no more, Mrs. Kaur. Her daughter's son's wife accused her of demanding dowry and physical and mental harassment under 498A. A woman who can't walk, a woman who can't go to the toilet herself. There was no accusation against her. Not even a one line of accusation against her. It is just her name added as accused number 4 in the criminal complaint. That's how lame and ridiculous these cases are.